Let us pray. We give thanks to God for the rich heritage of this province as found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Calgary McCall.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR 24, Jimmy W. Chow Bar Admission Act. This bill will permit Mr. Chow, who is a landed immigrant but currently stateless and not yet a Canadian citizen, to become a member of the Law Society of Alberta.
The honourable member for Calgary McCall has moved first reading of Bill PR 24, Jimmy W. Chow Bar Admission Act. Those wishing to give assent to first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill PR 24, being Jimmy W. Chow Bar Admission Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Nelson, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table with the Assembly copies of a news release paying tribute to our farming population on this Farmers' Day in Alberta.
Provincial Treasurer.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to file for the Legislative Assembly copies of the annual statements of the Alberta Resources Railway Corporation for the year ended December 31st, 1986.
Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table for the Assembly today material from the 1987-88 budget for the province of Quebec, which refutes the statement made by the Honourable Minister for Economic Trade and Development on June the 8th that total government contributions.
Honourable member, it's a tabling, not too much.
Review the material and consider correcting the record.
Special guests.
Rocky Mountain House.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege today to introduce to you and through you to the rest of the Assembly 38 grade 5 students from the Eckville Elementary School. They're accompanied by 2 teachers, Mr. John Walker and Miss Evelyn Lockhart, and 4 parents, Mrs. Lorna Coaster, Mrs. B. Engel, Mrs. Sharon Walker, and their bus driver, Mr. Larry Staples. They're seated in the members' gallery, Mr. Speaker, and I'd ask them to rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you Mr. Dan Love, who has just graduated from the Canadian Bible College in Regina and is en route to China as an English teacher. He is a close personal friend of the Associate Sergeant at Arms, Mr. Alan Gowler, and I would ask Mr. Love to please rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Cardston, followed by Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my privilege today to introduce to you and to the Assembly 15 students from the grade 9 class in the Glenwood School. They are here today accompanied by 2 teachers, Mr. Doug Smith and Mr. Kelly Thomas, 2 parents, Mrs. Vicki Smith and Mrs. Kathy Thomas, who coincidentally are married to the 2 teachers. I'd like to have them rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 16 grade 6 students from the Athlon School located in the Calder constituency. They are accompanied by 1 teacher, Mr. John Bell. They are seated in the public gallery, and I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, in the Minister's absence, there have been reports and serious concerns about the problems of kids going to school hungry. The Minister of Education in question period related her feelings that the school system cannot feed hungry children but only teach kids about nutrition. Mr. Speaker, at least they'll know what goes into a balanced diet their families can't afford. Mr. Speaker, it's serious enough the Calgary Public School Board passed a resolution that was passed unanimously directing administration to explore in conjunction with the city, the private sector, and all interested agencies a program to address the traditional needs, the nutritional needs, I should say, of school children. Mr. Speaker, in view of the fact that hunger most often stems from a lack of income, has the minister decided to participate in the Calgary School Board initiative to tackle the problem in a cooperative way?
Mr. Speaker, at all times, obviously, we would want to be cooperative with other jurisdictions in sharing information in whatever other areas available to us with respect to the problem in this case that has been identified. Mr. Speaker, it certainly is a grave problem. As I have read about it, I don't have direct information communicated to me, and certainly whatever we can do to share information with the Calgary School Board, we will.
Mr. Speaker, the sharing of information is great, but I think they'd like to share some food, and that may take some money, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of private agencies, I'm sure the minister is well aware, in both Calgary and Edmonton. For example, the Edmonton City Centre Church Corporation, for example, feeds some 2,500 hungry kids a very modest snack every day. No help from the provincial government. The food banks and the milk funds are other groups who are trying to pick up the pieces, again, with no help from the province. I suppose she'll share information with them, though. But my question to the minister, in view of the seriousness of this growing problem, would the minister be prepared to help share the costs of some of these programs?
Mr. Speaker, so often, and it is appropriate in most cases, we are faced with treating the symptoms of a number of problems in our society. We certainly, in looking at the amount of money that is available to families under social allowance, believe that there is very adequate funding available to families for the food for their children. Mr. Speaker, if the money is not used to purchase food for their children, that is a problem that is very difficult for us to deal with, other than getting into every single family that finds itself in this position and possibly taking those children away from those families. I think, Mr. Speaker, all of us must work very hard at, first of all, exerting some amount of peer pressure on those folks who we believe are expending monies in other areas than on their children, and for those who lack possibly the understanding or the skills to deal with the problem in terms of them doing the very best they can, but not being able to understand what it is that should be purchased for their children. That's an area we can certainly speak to.
Mr. Speaker, it's not only the traditional inner-city schools where they're facing these problems. I'm told by school officials in both Calgary and Edmonton that's spreading into the traditional middle-class areas. Is the minister saying then that the reason that we have hungry children is simply because parents don't know how to handle their money? Is that the information she's given to this Assembly?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if the honourable member, the Leader of the Opposition, is telling me that there somehow is something very different and unusual about the thousands of families who, in fact, are letting me and indirectly through other avenues know that they are very proud of the fact that they are managing relatively well under the social allowance program. They certainly don't want to be there, but having found themselves there, they are managing. Mr. Speaker, one must draw their own conclusions in terms of the fact that there are some 3% of people who are on social allowance find themselves going to the food bank.
Well, Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. The bottom line is that there's hungry children, and they're sure not going to learn in the schools if they're hungry. And rather than blaming parents and everything else, would this government at least be prepared to put some money into programs like hot lunches and snacks instead of blaming everybody else and doing something from this government?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that in discussing the problem that we have before us now is a matter of ascertaining blame. The citizens of Alberta are among the most generous in Canada in funding social allowance and other programs. And, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the dollars that are allocated are sufficient. And it is not our view that we have to constantly treat the symptoms of, in a number of cases where people are not managing. What we must try to do is put whatever is necessary in place by way of introducing skills or information that hopefully puts those people in a position to manage. And for those that refuse to, I will not accept that we should not talk about it.
You member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we introduced this issue several days ago, and it's quite right. We should be dealing with the cause, not the fallout. Let's deal with the cause. And it's not just families on social assistance, but let's keep the children front and center. Will the minister, now, finally, will the minister or the government take some initiative here and put together those institutions, those boards, those organizations involved to deal with and resolve the critical issue? We know how to do it, but we have to put the people together to prevent what's happening.
You have to add.
Mr. Speaker, at any time, this government and the minister will be available to speak with the Calgary School Board and others who are interested in working in this area. Mr. Speaker, it has been my view that in so many instances where problems have been identified, quite appropriately, the community in those areas have responded. And if we can assist in coordination in other areas, we certainly will.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the second question to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. Mr. Speaker, last fall, and we've talked about this in question period, the Minister issued a directive to the Workers' Compensation Board, which has literally resulted in hundreds of injured workers being arbitrarily cut off from receiving benefits. Mr. Speaker, I suggest this constitutes blatant political interference in the administration of the Workers' Compensation Board. And I want the Minister to draw a line for us, Mr. Speaker. How far is he prepared to go in dictating to the Workers' Compensation Board?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly don't accept the honourable member's suggestion about interference. I, as a Minister of the Crown, am responsible for the operations and activities of the Workers' Compensation Board, responsible for reporting to my colleagues in government and in this Assembly. And where it is necessary to give the Board direction with respect to policy on behalf of the government, I will do that.
Well, supplementary question. The Minister's idea of interference is somewhat different. If you send a directive saying you have to do that, surely that's interference. Mr. Speaker, the Minister directed the Board to reduce benefits and cut off injured workers in order to save money. I suggest, Mr. Speaker, that he's contravened his own act. Section 12 of the Workers' Compensation Act states clearly the Board has exclusive jurisdiction to, quote, determine all matters and questions arising under this Act or the regulations and the action or decision of the Board thereon is final and conclusive. Mr.
Question, Honourable Member.
Why is the Minister contravening his own act?
Mr. Speaker, I gave no such direction with respect to reduction of benefits or cutting off of injured workers from benefits. What I did give direction on behalf of the government was to review the cost of claims and review ways to reduce the cost of claims, because I felt and the government felt that there was no justification for a 20% increase in the cost of claims with a 0% increase in the numbers of claims.
Mr. Speaker, precisely what has happened. They've cut off injured workers because of this directive from this minister.
That's right.
Contravening your own act, Mr. Minister. And my question is, in view of the havoc that this has created, it's in absolute shambles over there, would the minister now be prepared to follow his own act and review that directive and turn it over to the advisory committee, at least set up a select standing committee to look in this very serious matter?
Mr. Speaker, once again, I don't accept the honourable member's suggestion about any disarray or disorganization. What I do accept is the responsibility to give the board the proper direction so that it undertakes its mandate of providing benefits to those who are entitled to them.
Well, Mr. Minister, you have a pretty funny idea of how to operate with the Workers' Compensation Board. When you send off a directive, that's an order, Mr.
Order, please. The succinct supplementaries are not happening. Could we have the question, please, Leader of the Opposition?
Mr. Speaker, maybe we could get some answers. It's a very serious matter. My question is, why didn't the minister at least set this over to advisory committee, which is part of his act, before he acted unilaterally in this matter?
Because, Mr. Speaker, I sought the advice and the counsel of my colleagues in government, as well as a number of people in unions and in industry throughout the province. Those people were expressing concern to me. I saw the numbers, recommended to my colleagues that we take action, and we have done exactly that.
Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, if indeed he consults with his colleagues in government rather than an advisory committee, and if indeed he insists on giving directions, will he not have the courage to bring a bill into this House to abolish the board and run it himself? Will he have that kind of courage?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my colleagues suggest, it's nice to have the views of the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party. Those views are now on the record, and we know where he stands.
Leader of the Liberal Party, followed by Clover Bar.
I'll be waiting to see whether he has the courage to follow his words. Mr. Speaker, this question is to the Premier. 2 days ago, we made it quite clear in the House, Mr. Speaker, this government had spent $73 million more on travel than British Columbia over the last 5 years, and of course we pointed out specifically to the Honourable Flying Minister from Medicine Hat of Intergovernmental Affairs that $60,000 was in that direction. Now, it's great concern that the Cabinet this year by themselves we spending $620,000, Mr. Speaker, on travel and $150,000 in miscellaneous expense. Even with the Treasurer's announcement that this was cut 15%, I'd like to ask the Premier a question that in light of these many programs that are going begging for funds, whether it's food for children or disabled having to go through means tests, whether it reads like a litany, how can he justify the continuing high level of travel by your Cabinet and by the government at taxpayers' expense?
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, everything a government does is at taxpayers' expense. And it's interesting to note the honourable member and his party continue to call for greater and greater expenses to the taxpayer. Every time they talk and ask for another program, more dollars, it's more at taxpayers' expense. What I should tell him, Mr. Speaker, ministers have a responsibility to fulfill their department's mandate. They must travel. They must get around this province. They must, in other times, they must deal with other provinces, other countries. We are going to do that. This province is not an inward-looking province. We are leaders in the world, and we're going to maintain that.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Certainly the Liberal Party wants you to spend more money, but on children and on disabled and on seniors, not on yourselves. Now, can the Premier share with us whether he still allows his cabinet colleagues to travel first class?
Mr. Speaker, first coming back to the original part of his question, the people of Alberta support children, disabled, and others to a greater extent per capita than any province in Canada. Yes, Mr. Speaker, ministers often do travel first class, and often it is a full working opportunity. We are going to continue to do that because of the nature of our jobs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is disgusting. Of the fat cats on the Cabinet side traveling first class. I suppose you don't want the peasants listen to you to discuss issues. Well, would he not even make a move then? If we're traveling first class, would he not now They've been traveling first class. Give an edict that there will be no first class travel henceforth. Would he go that far?
No, Mr. Speaker.
No, I thought I had 2 more, Mr. Speaker. Am I count wrong? Gee whiz. I had them down, Mr. Speaker. Are you going to pull me back now? Well, Mr. Speaker, then I'd like to ask that would he go this far? Obviously, he will not throw him back for first class. Would he set out guidelines for meals and for hotels? None of this living like a bit of an exile royalty running Alberta. Would he go that far? Set a limit on meals and...
Mr. Speaker, obviously the budget sets limits. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has gone through a budget debate. He knows that there have been dramatic reductions in the area of hosting and travel. That has been this government showing leadership. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that the Liberals are so bereft of policies to discuss that what they are now trying to do is try and drag up some kind of problems in travel where I've watched ministers and public servants as well travel throughout this country, and it isn't fun. It's no great deal to sit around airports, to sit around hotel lobbies, away from your families, away from your homes, your neighbors, representing people as MLAs, and every now and then it takes some cheap shot from a guy like Taylor to get into the issue.
Edmonton Highlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure how traveling first class alleviates the problems of sitting around airports, but I wonder if the Premier will, I wonder if the Premier will give the commitment to this Assembly and to Albertans that he will put a stop immediately to first class travel by executive assistants and high-level salaried employees.
Mr. Speaker, I should not have called him Taylor. It's the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon. Coming back to this question, Mr. Speaker, executive assistants and high-paid public servants do not fly first class unless it's necessary in the conduct of their business with the ministers that are conducting business with them.
Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary on the point the Premier just made, what are the guidelines for upper-level civil servants as to what level of travel they can have?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are guidelines. I don't carry them at my fingertips, but if the member wants to put it on the order paper, I'll get them for him.
Viking supplementary. Cypress Redcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to either the Premier or the Acting Minister of Economic Development. I wonder if either minister could outline for the Assembly the amount of business that was conducted on these trips, the amount of business that resulted in contracts to businesses in the province of Alberta, and how many jobs that those contracts created throughout the province in that 5-year period.
Monkey business. Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the province of Alberta has been breaking down doors and removing barriers all over the world for the business people, often small business people of Alberta. Our files are filled with thanks for that from businesses in this province. We are able to lead this country in trade matters. We've been able to establish many of the policies of the Government of Canada with regards to other nations, and we're going to continue to do it. This government is a leader in Canada. We're going to continue to be that way.
Clover Bar, followed by Calgary Foothills.
My question is to the Minister of Energy, and I'd like to say the Premier's R.B. Bennett said we're going to blast our ways into the markets of the world, or words to that effect. Mr. Speaker, the Minister, in the last year, nearly $3.8 billion worth of aid has gone to the energy sector from the provincial government, the federal government, and the Saskatchewan government in the form of grants, loans, royalty cuts, and tax reductions. Can the Minister indicate what monitoring is going on as to what is being done with the $350 million that the federal government has given the energy industry in the province? What monitoring is going on of those funds?
Well, Mr. Speaker,
I'm happy to say today, as all honourable members should know, although we hear a lot of gloom and doom from those that want to spread it, the oil and gas industry in this province is looking very optimistic to the future, and the programs that were put in place last year are showing the results, along with the stabilization of world oil prices. Just this past week, we see drilling at 116 rigs, another 34 rigs on the move, 150. Compare that with last year, when we had approximately 40 to 50 rigs that were drilling. Land sales are going very well. The last land sale, some $32 million, one of the larger land sales in some time. And the same thing is occurring in Saskatchewan. The land posting requests that we're getting are double what we can handle. And the royalty holidays, the royalty reductions of over $1 billion, 5-year royalty holiday going up to November of this year, 3 years after that. All those programs are showing the results. There's a mood in the industry that's very optimistic and positive, and we're seeing that mood being translated into announcements, with Amoco just the day before yesterday announcing a significant increase in their programs for enhanced oil recovery, increased drilling in the Lindbergh field. They're starting up steaming again. We see Mobil announcing that they are going to increase their drilling. And again, today we see Shell announcing their intention to make applications to the RCB for work in the Peace River country. So, Mr. Speaker, all those programs are working, and the industry is optimistic as we are.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. He gave me the whole load. He didn't leave me any supplementaries. Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question. Can the minister indicate of the $350 million that the federal government has offered, how much of that has already been used in the province of Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the monies haven't begun to flow under that particular program. They're establishing their offices in Calgary, and from what I heard the other day from the federal minister, it's planned that the first monies would begin to flow during the month of July.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister or the Minister of Manpower, does the government have any indication, or any ballpark figure as to how many jobs potential there could be from the program after it's put into place?
As I recall, Mr. Speaker, there were some 15 to 20,000 direct jobs that was expected from the announcement of that particular program. And of course, you have to consider the impact of the indirect jobs as well.
Calgary Forest Line.
Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the minister said, we all welcome a return to health of the energy sector. To the Minister of Energy, what steps is he taking to ensure that this improvement in the energy sector is orderly and not frenzied in such a way that it would lead to the kind of thing that happened last December and January, the death of 9 oil field workers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've addressed the needs of the conventional oil and gas industry in terms of programs. The federal government responded in terms of removing the PGRT and the introduction of their particular program. We feel that governments have done all that is necessary for the industry to thrive now that world oil prices are stabilizing. We have a fiscal regime in place that is the best in North America. The costs of recovery are the lowest in North America, and therefore the returns are the best in North America, and the results are such that we will see the most activity in North America. So, in spite of the honourable member's desire to see more, or to see more and more government intervention into the workplace, we feel that the industry is satisfied with what has already been done.
Calgary Buffalo.
Yes, the $350 million is a benefit in lieu of tax depletion, and we're looking for a federal announcement with respect to tax changes on June 18th. And I'm wondering whether the minister can tell this House whether he anticipates any negative changes, removals of any of the tax benefits enjoyed by the oil industry and upon which the continued prosperity of this province depends.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I suppose we all could anticipate what might happen, but I think we'll just have to wait and see what actually does happen.
Calgary Foothills, followed by Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Social Services. With the impending reduction by 1/3 of the beds at the 2 Calgary women's shelters, emergency shelters, could the Minister please advise if she has assessed this situation to find out why this closure is being proposed when there has been no reduction in funding?
Mr. Speaker, from the information provided to me, the shelter organizations in Calgary believe that there is an inequity in the funding that is available to them, and notwithstanding the fact that their funding for this year is precisely the same as last, apparently they have a shortfall in community funding that would have normally been received by them. The president of the Council on Women's Shelters, unfortunately, is away for the week. It is my intention to speak to her hopefully this weekend and reinforce our offer to assist them with the human resources audit, which will help identify where the inequities are possibly existing.
Supplementary to the Minister, is there truth then in the allegations that the Calgary centres are being penalized because they don't fit the model that presently exists?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is premature for me to make that observation. Certainly, I believe strongly in the Council on Women's Shelters organization and their endeavours to find a fair model that would distribute the funding across the province. But last year was the first year they had an opportunity to work with this model. They also, I believe, at the time have experienced a growth in beds in the Calgary area. So it may well be that after further study, they believe the model ought to be changed. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd certainly be amenable to any change.
Supplementary, are there any steps being taken then in the interim so that the 20 women per night that could arrive on the doorstep will not be turned away nor their treatment postponed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the beds are not available and from time to time it is my understanding that that occurs, and more particularly in the Edmonton and Calgary region than possibly in some of the other areas, though that has been expressed as a problem on occasion. But it is my view, Mr. Speaker, that what must be certainly given some publicity is the 24-hour crisis line available from social services, and no women and their families will ever be without a place to stay as long as they contact us and hopefully get a referral if they do arrive at the shelter over to the social services.
Unfortunately, Honourable Member, government can't raise on that question initiated by government. Edmonton Goldbar, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, it's interesting that we've appeared to attempt to put a stop on family violence based on the level of funding from the government. Has the Minister determined, while the funding remains the same, whether the demand has increased? Can you tell us if the demand for care in shelters has increased, or has it conveniently stayed the same as the funding has?
Mr. Speaker, the demand may well have increased, especially in the 2 metropolitan areas, and with respect to that, Calgary has had an increase in beds, I believe, last year as a result of the building of their new home. But, Mr. Speaker, it is certainly my view that the problem of battered women is not going to be solved simply by treating the symptoms of that. One battered woman is too many. And, Mr. Speaker, what we must do is work hard at solving the problem before it presents itself in a way and manifests itself in a way that women and children are arriving at shelters.
Mr. Speaker, in view of the minister's concern of treating the problem, will she then commit herself to a province-wide education program similar to that ADAC has in place that addresses the causes of this problem, which is an acceptance of violence against women and children and a lack of resources for those women and children?
Mr. Speaker, I would be interested in the honourable member's further detail of who she believes is accepting violence in this province as something that is okay. I have not met such a person, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, as with so many things in our society, we have people who are breaking the law and breaking very fundamental moral law, and the citizens of this province overall decry that, have been generous in their funding both in the community and through government in addressing this issue, and I believe that certainly is spelled out by looking at the funds that have been made available in Alberta on a per capita basis and looking at that relative to the rest of the country. But, Mr. Speaker, I certainly have made a commitment to addressing the fundamental problem. We have people in the department and through the Office of the Family Violence that are addressing this problem. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of organizations who want very much community by community to be working in this area. I can assure the honourable member that the department, and I can assure the honourable member, when she is interested, that the department has a commitment of staff to various projects, and I certainly hope within the next several months to be able to make those announcements.
Edmonton Calder, followed by Edmonton Mill Woods, Calgary Buffalo, Edmonton Belmont. Pardon me, Calgary on. Well, yes, indeed. The member had only used 3, but it's an unusual practice. It's still within the numerical strength. Final. She has one left.
The minister is aware that the Calgary Junior League has proposed to donate some $30,000 plus volunteers to help study ways to reduce family violence, and thank you. Should the government be assisting in this work to address some of the causes of family violence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, while that organization wasn't one of the ones that I was referencing in regard to the Office of Family Violence and how staff would be working with a particular group, certainly I would encourage the honourable member to make sure that that group coordinates its activities through the Office of Family Violence so that we can receive the most benefits possible by that type of coordination.
Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Minister of Social Services. In a June 5th position paper submitted to the government by the Alberta Association of Social Workers, it was reported that some income security workers were carrying active caseloads of 325 cases or more, and that as a consequence of these impossibly high caseloads, reduced service access for clients is resulting in increased frustration and anger among clients. Has the Minister's Department recognized in a memo a year ago that increased client violence towards social worker staff was a problem? Is the Minister not concerned with repeated and worsening reports of violence against her frontline workers due to increased frustration and despair of ordinary Albertans on social assistance?
Mr. Speaker, as a result of the information gleaned last year, and all honourable members will be aware that I had asked for reports from all the regions in terms of the delivery of services. And based on those reports, identified that, that certainly there should be far more frontline staff in place to handle the people that were coming to us for assistance. The increase in staff took place over the course of a number of months last summer and fall. And, Mr. Speaker, what we did was set in place a new set of goals. As opposed to looking at a specific caseload, it was our belief that the fundamental thing that was being sought after here was a fast delivery of service to clients. In other words, that the client shouldn't be waiting days or weeks in order to access services that were needed, particularly financial services. So on that basis, Mr. Speaker, we have a new set of criteria in place. It is not a matter of caseload, it is a matter of service being delivered expeditiously.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the caseloads remain high. As the department adopted a standard of 125 cases per income security worker in 1982, and as the caseloads are continually escalating in 1987, what actions is the minister taking to alleviate this situation? Or does the minister not take her standards seriously?
Mr. Speaker, I have just said to the honourable member that we are measuring our services based on serving people and not the measurement of how many cases any particular person may be carrying.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if caseloads are high, then they're not going to be delivering the services. In view of the fact that social workers have expressed a desire for protective measures such as a warning system to indicate those clients which have demonstrated violent behavior, 2 workers going out on home visits, and a commissioner in each district office, will the minister be implementing these security measures?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, with respect to the caseloads, it very much depends on the service that is required. In a high percentage of instances, what the people who are coming forward are in need of is strictly financial assistance in the short term. That does not require a lengthy discussion nor counseling with a social worker. And again, it is my view that what is important here to be addressed is the type of service and the availability of it and the timeliness of it with respect to clients. And, Mr. Speaker, I am not receiving complaints from people who are saying that, as I was a year ago, that they were not having services delivered in a timely manner. And, Mr. Speaker, with respect to what is happening in the violence area, since last fall, I have had no reports of violence in respect of the various offices. Certainly we had some of those reports prior to that, but Mr. Speaker, I believe that the social workers are still commenting on a situation that was in existence at a previous time.
Well, it's obvious the minister hasn't spoken to some social workers recently. Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. As the minister is placing impossible demands on social workers, expecting ever higher levels of performance, why is it then that the department does not take responsibility for these expectations by at least providing support to social workers when they are assaulted?
Mr. Speaker, in our society, when people have been assaulted, obviously those who have done the assaulting have charges laid against them, and that has been the case in instances that I recall last year. And I would still say, Mr. Speaker, in reference to the member's assumption that somehow we are not concerned about the social workers, we are. If the social workers are going to their organization and citing instances that the department and the minister does not know about, then obviously nothing can be done about those instances. I would be pleased to receive and have enumerated for me the occasions that the social workers on an individual basis across this province believe haven't been handled appropriately by senior staff.
Edmonton Goldbar, followed by Stetler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely the minister understands that people who consider themselves aggrieved don't always send in a written complaint. They act. If the object of the first exchange is speed, let's talk about follow-up, Mr. Speaker. What are the minister's criteria, frequency of contact, home visits for follow-up? and are they being met?
Mr. Speaker, contrary to how a number of people, particularly in the opposition, may view our society as relatively the same, in other words, individuals should be treated the same, it is not our view at all. It is our view that individuals on a case-by-case basis must be assessed in terms of what their needs are, and on that basis, the visitation and the counseling occurs.
Stetler.
Supplementary to the minister, while I commend the criteria she uses in the interview process for timely delivery of services, my question would be that in that interview process, is the interview sufficiently thorough to determine that actual need exists and that funds are not being directed where they should not be?
Mr. Speaker, it is our view that based on the interview process, based on the form that is used, which an individual must provide information on, which it will be developed one way or the other as to the eligibility of a client, that it is all in place and appropriate. Unfortunately, in possibly a small number of instances where a client does not provide accurate information, we have no way of ascertaining that unless it is reported to us by outside sources, or alternately it is discovered in the process of visits with the client, particularly home visits.
Edmonton Millwoods, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs. During and after World War II, there were some 21,000 Canadian residents of Japanese origin, most of whom were Canadian citizens, that were forcibly evicted from the coastal region of British Columbia, dispersed across the country, forced to live in internment camps under appalling conditions, many of them ending up in southern Alberta. Clearly, this was a terrible injustice in our history caused by racial prejudice and a lack of political leadership. My question to the Minister: since the Minister of State and the National Association of Japanese Canadians are currently negotiating methods to redress in some way these violations of rights and freedoms that were inflicted on these Canadian residents, and since this will impact on thousands of Albertans, can the Minister outline for the House his government's position on this matter?
I didn't quite get the last couple of words in the honourable member's question. I would, with Speaker's indulgence perhaps, without incurring a loss of a supplementary, could I ask that to be repeated? Issue.
Mr. Speaker, since the impact of this decision will be affecting thousands of Albertans, can the Minister advise the House what his government's position is on the matter of the negotiation of redress for Japanese Canadians?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is a federal government responsibility, obviously, and is now under discussion between the federal government and various organizations. There is no involvement on the part of the government of Alberta in this matter, either financially or otherwise, and no request, to my knowledge, has been made to our government for any participation in this process by either individual Albertans of Japanese origin or by organizations representing those people.
Supplementary question to the Minister. Would he tell the Assembly if he and his government favors, as a very start, some public acknowledgement that injustices were committed against these Canadians of Japanese origin?
It's my understanding, Mr. Speaker, that the federal government has already done that. Both the previous Liberal government and the current Progressive Conservative government have indicated that to be the case. That, of course, once again, is a matter solely within the responsibility of the federal government. It was the federal government of the day that launched the actions which resulted in the resettlement of many of the Japanese people, people of Japanese origin living on the West Coast. Not the government of Alberta in any way, although many of the Japanese Canadians have settled in Alberta and, of course, form a very important part of the economic life and the social fabric of southern Alberta in particular.
and I have personal knowledge of their great contribution that they've made to this province.
Supplementary to the minister, since some 4,000 Japanese Canadian Albertans are interested to know whether this government cares about their plight, can the minister tell the Assembly what representations he has made to his federal counterparts in making amends for this injustice, and if those representations included reminding the federal government of Mr. Mulrooney's statement of May 16, 1984, when he said, and I quote, "If there was a conservative government, I can assure you we would be compensating Japanese Canadians," unquote.
In the wrong house.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is clearly out of order in addressing these questions to myself and to our government. This is a federal government responsibility entirely, and the federal government moved on this matter during the course of the Second World War under a responsibility under the Constitution of Canada, which is clearly that of the federal government. Mr. Speaker, we have the greatest sympathy for people who have been dispossessed of their property for any reason whatsoever in this country. But it is not the responsibility of this government and for the honourable member to try. The honourable member for Highlands constantly interrupts me, Mr. Speaker. And come on. And now you. And during the course of her interruptions, her voice gets shriller and shriller and shriller. But I would ask, Mr. Speaker, for the common courtesy of being allowed to respond to the question, and which I was in the process of doing. If the honourable members in the New Democratic Party wish to turn this Assembly into a shouting match situation such as we see in the Federal House of Commons, fine. But the people of Alberta will recognize that for what it is.
That's right. The time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions if they are in order, because the chair has had great difficulty allowing any of the three questions that have so far taken place. But the immaterial honourable leader of the opposition, the question to the House is there unanimous consent? Opposed?
Supplementary. Mr. Speaker, the record is clear this government doesn't seem to care about Albertans of Japanese origin, but let me just say...
Order, please, honourable member. This is a supplementary question.
Indeed. Will the minister and his government lend support to the position of the National Association of Japanese Canadians in their call for reasonable compensation for the injustices they suffered? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, that representation made by the honourable member for Millwoods is despicable.
Yeah.
Despicable, because he alleged that we do not care about citizens in this province. That is not true. No request has been made to this government by either individual citizens of Japanese origin or by the organization mentioned by the honourable member for Millwoods for any participation by this government in that process. I applaud them for what they are doing in dealing properly with the Government of Canada. But to try and bring this matter into this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and through innuendo or indirect comment to try and imply that this government does not care for the citizens of Alberta of any ethnic background or origin is just despicable.
Additional supplements on honourable member. Well, there may well be a point of order in a moment or two. Additional supplementaries on this issue that are germane to the topic and in order? None. All right. Chair recognizes a point of order. Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table for the Assembly the current letter that was sent to the Premier.
It's hardly a point of order, honourable member. Order, please. Order, please. Time for tabling occurs at a different part of the day. And if there's indeed a point of order, perhaps the honourable member would like to cite standing orders or Beauchesne so that we might get on with it. Thank you. The chair would like to apologize to the House for an inadvertent variation in procedure today, which occurred in the line of questioning from the member by the member for Calgary Foothills. And while the chair did allow the member to have main question plus 3 supplementaries, the chair apologizes that it is indeed the general flow of the House that the member is to ask all 4 questions at the first part of having introduced the topic and not to come back in. So the chair apologizes for that inadvertent action today, and it is clearly not a precedent of the House. Orders of the day. Might we revert to the introduction of special guests? Member for Lethbridge West, followed